Hello everyone and welcome to Unit 8 of MBA 6113 Change Management. As you know, this is the final unit of the class, so we're now in the last week of the course, trying to wrap everything up here. This week we'll discuss soft systems models for change, which are pretty much the opposite of the hard systems models that we discussed in Unit 7 last week. So again, some of the material might be very similar to what we discussed last week, just a little bit different, and I kind of provided a comparison, kind of a contrast between the hard systems models and the soft systems models last week, but we'll go through that in a little more detail and provide some discussion about organizational development and kind of wrap up the course this week. So we'll go ahead and get started here. As mentioned last week, we can, when we're implementing change, we can pretty much be assured that we're going to be addressing a situation of what we call either hard complexity or soft complexity. And if you think back to the discussion in Unit 7, we know that situations of hard complexity we associate with being very systematic. We use a systematic approach that is kind of quantifiable, that we can kind of measure that performance. We can diagnose the problem, implement a solution, measure the performance, the outcome, and then make changes as needed. The hard systems models really don't address some of the human elements that we often find in situations of change. Very much like I gave the example in Unit 7 of comparing the hard systems models to what we call the hard sciences, biology, physics, medicine, in that we use the scientific method to test different hypotheses. We perform experiments, clinical trials, those types of things, and we have kind of a control group and very systematic approach to solving problems when we deal with situations of hard complexity. And then I compared situations of soft complexity to what we call the soft sciences, psychology, sociology, and because those really deal with the human side, more of the emotional side. This is really kind of a debate between logic and rationality versus emotion and culture. It's kind of that age-old argument of which is the most appropriate method for either making decisions or implementing change or addressing strategy. Is it more appropriate to use logic and rationality, which would be the hard systems, or to address the emotional component, which would be the soft systems? So we kind of jokingly refer to as situations of soft complexity as messy situations. And we say messy situations because we're dealing with, it's not something we can simply say, we're measuring output, or this is cost benefit analysis where the decision is obvious to us. If we're trying to improve output, if it's a situation of hard complexity, we're trying to increase output or something like that, we conduct a cost-benefit analysis, or maybe do some SWOT analysis, or whatever it is we need to do from a strategic planning perspective. And we can identify the solutions moving forward, and then we can implement those changes and monitor the results. Situations of soft complexity, we call those messy situations because we are dealing with the culture of the organization. which anytime we start dealing with the human side, kind of the human element of the organization, employee morale, entrenched power bases, perhaps within the organization there's kind of some entrenchment, and there's those power bases, those internal alliances within the organization that make it difficult to implement change. We might be dealing with different leadership styles. We often, we kind of joke around that the more kind of messy the situation gets, or we start dealing with larger and larger organizations with these entrenched power bases and with a particular culture and different leadership styles, it becomes increasingly difficult to implement change. We can think of numerous examples, even in politics, government examples, or even examples in higher education, or those examples of institutions that are entrenched in established processes and practices over many, many years. Becomes increasingly difficult to change those practices. So the situations become more messy, basically. So when we're dealing with situations of soft complexity, we really only have three potential solution methods. We only have really three ways that we can solve problems in situations of soft complexity. We can either resolve a problem, we can solve a problem, or we can dissolve a problem. So let's look at these for a moment here and start with solve a problem. If we say the problem can be solved, inarguably solved, then we're really not dealing with a situation of soft complexity. That's more of a situation of a hard systems model, because if a situation can be solved, it's more research oriented. We have found the problem. Everyone agrees that there's a problem. We've diagnosed the problem. We implement a solution, and then we monitor the results, and then we make adjustments accordingly until it's solved. So solving a problem, if we say that we're solving a problem, we're really more dealing with a situation of hard complexity, more of a hard systems model. So that just leaves kind of resolved and dissolved. If a problem is said to be able to be resolved, we kind of refer to that. Obviously that's a situation of soft complexity, because what we do is we end up satisficing. In other words, we end up finding a satisfactory solution that will suffice. And we find this is probably one of the more common kind of solution methodologies that we find in situations of soft complexity. It's often easier to simply resolve a problem than it is to either solve or dissolve a problem. So when we resolve a problem, again, we end up satisficing. We kind of find that middle ground. We find that satisfactory solution that will suffice. And it ends up obviously being a kind of a temporary fix, kind of a Band-Aid approach to the true issue, the true nature, kind of root of the problem. But it's so much easier. That type of change, whether we can argue whether or not that's actually true change or not, is so much easier to implement in a situation of soft complexity, because we try to make everybody happy. We try to satisfy the organizational culture, keep all the power bases happy. And as you know, it's very difficult to please everyone within the organization, especially when you're trying to change something. So even though resolving a problem might not be the ideal solution, we find it actually happens probably most often. What we're going to talk about is organizational development, which is pretty much what we do when is a focus on dissolving the problem, removing the problem altogether. It is very much a design approach to handling change within situations of soft complexity. When we focus on dissolving a problem or finding a solution that ends up dissolving the problem, we're basically talking about altering the environment completely. We're talking about changing or redesigning the organizational environment so that problem is removed. Again, it's very much design oriented. We call this organizational development because what we're trying to do is we're trying to take the organization as a whole, and we recognize these problems, and then we want to modify or alter the organization as a whole so that these problems become removed. Very much kind of a surgical, again, think of it as surgery. If there's a problem area, the surgeon will go in and remove the potential problem. So that's really kind of what we're focused on here. We're talking about altering the environment completely so that problem is removed. Now, this doesn't just mean coming in and firing everybody in the organization, although that may be part of the problem, is a restructuring of the organization, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. It might mean upgrading certain processes or systems, or maybe a new type of technology that eliminates a process problem that we had before. If we have a particular group of entrenched, perhaps personnel that aren't, maybe they're not doing their job up to a certain level of quality assurance or meeting certain quality standard, and because of the culture and the power bases and those kinds of things within the organization, we can't implement any additional personnel requirements because they fight that level of change. So instead, perhaps we invest in a new type of technology that either replaces those workers' jobs maybe, or helps them meet that level of quality without changing those potential personnel requirements. So nonetheless, we end up altering the environment. We take a design-oriented approach to handling these types of situations. And so organizational development is really something that you see a focus on quite a bit. It's kind of, I don't want to say a buzzword, but it has become increasingly popular from the kind of executive level, the strategic level of the organization. We focus on designing and developing the entire organization as a whole in ways that remove problems. And again, thinking back to Unit 7, we know that those hard systems approaches, the hard systems approach to solving problems, assumed this rational model. We assumed that individuals within the organization, both employees and managers and executives, we assumed that these individuals made rational decisions and rational choices all the time. Very much an economics approach to decision making. We assumed that whatever was in the best interests of the individuals, they would make those decisions, and then ultimately we would make whatever's in the best interests of the firm all the time, and we know that's not the case. And so sometimes the interests of the firm and the interests of the individuals don't always align, and so we end up having some challenges. We obviously don't want to argue that individuals don't make rational decisions, because we know that most of the time we do. Most of the time we'll make decisions and we'll act in a way that is similar to rationality in terms of making making decisions in our own self-interest. But the challenge becomes when you have a group of individuals together, like the culture of the organization and many employees and personnel, and you combine leadership styles. Everyone acts in a way that is rational to them. And so when you kind of have competing views of rationality, it's very difficult for the hard systems approach to address the cultural dimension of the organization. Very difficult for the hard systems approach to address the political dimension, because we know every organization has some level of internal politics involved. And also the cognitive dimension, kind of the free thinking, new idea generation, innovation dimension of the organization. We can apply the hard systems approach to existing processes and problems and try to solve issues and increase efficiency. But in terms of being able to kind of prepare for the future, develop new ideas and be innovative, there has to be this certain cognitive dimension that we allow individuals, that we kind of foster that cognitive dimension, we foster that creativity and innovation, and so we do want some level of the organizational culture and creativity to kind of bloom, so to speak, within the firm. And so the situations of soft complexity, or the soft systems model, addresses these issues much in a much better way than the hard systems really can't do. Okay, so as I mentioned a moment ago, organizational development. That's, if you think of organizational development as kind of the umbrella for soft systems models. So organizational development, again, is kind of that overarching umbrella. So there are a lot of different what we call soft systems theories or methodologies to managing change. A lot of different ways we can solve problems and say, well, we applied a soft systems model. There are a lot of models out there for doing that. However, they all pretty much fall under what we call the organizational development approach to change management. Again, we focus from an organizational development perspective. We focus on trying to move the entire organization forward in a way that resolves those problems, and yet still addresses a lot of the political and cultural issues and cognitive issues that we just couldn't address with a hard systems model or approach to managing change. So again, organizational development is very much a soft systems approach, and it's behavior science oriented. It's focused on the behavior of the human side, the individuals within the organization, and how do we either encourage or continue to foster the type of behavior that we want within the organization and eliminate the behavior that we don't want to drive the organization forward. Focused on organizational learning. We talk in terms of organizational development. We talk about the organization as a learning system. The entire organization as a whole as a learning system. And again, this is kind of one of those increasingly popular topics in business right now. We talk about things like knowledge management. Knowledge management has become an increasingly popular focus in the organization, and that's because we know that a firm as a whole has kind of this learning curve. You can have an organization that perhaps one department or one kind of pocket of that organization starts to do something new, starts to develop a new process or new way of doing things. And perhaps it's highly efficient. Perhaps it's new and cutting edge and innovative. And then hopefully over time, if the organization has a system in place to be able to take that knowledge that this one small department has learned and kind of disseminate that through the rest of the organization so that the other departments begin doing it. If it's a better way of doing things, the other departments can start doing it as well. And so organizational learning in knowledge management has kind of become its own field, because we can find organizations that are highly effective at taking new ideas and new ways of doing things that are learned in one department, and then eventually, and hopefully rather quickly, all of a sudden that becomes organization-wide. Across the entire organization they're doing that. And then you have other firms who aren't very effective at doing that, and you might have all these different departments doing things in a different way, and no real learning between the groups going on. So one of the focus of organizational development is obviously organizational learning and kind of that knowledge management approach to effectiveness within the company. There's a goal of obviously long-term sustainability. If we're taking a design approach to solving problems, the goal is sustainability in the long term. We don't simply want to resolve problems now or find a satisfactory solution that suffices in the immediate term, just to have this problem kind of perpetuate itself next year, the year after, so on and so forth. We want to take a design approach and figure out a way to move the organization forward so that this problem is dissolved. The organizational development approach uses what we call change agents as facilitators of change. You've probably heard this term before, change agents. We might recognize those as intrapreneurs, folks within the organization that are very entrepreneurial minded, but they work inside the organization. That's kind of what we refer to them as intrapreneurs. And they develop new ideas and new processes and figure out ways of getting people on board with some of these new methods of doing things. So the change agent kind of takes it a step further and perhaps is very effective at developing new ideas and new processes, new ways of doing things, but also helps the entire organization begin to implement these and gets people on board for these new ideas and begins to facilitate that change. Now, obviously, change is more than just one person doing this, but effective change agents, those facilitators of change, are good at gaining buy-in from all the different individuals or departments needed to implement change. overcoming the resistance and the barriers that we see when implementing change. Organizational development also emphasizes adaptability. One of the things about the hard systems models was that they're, again, very firm, very rigid, and kind of inflexible. The soft systems models and the organizational development approach to change management emphasizes that adaptability. We've got to be able to respond and adapt quickly if we recognize something needs to be different in our change implementation plan. If we begin to make a change and we recognize either something's not working or we need to modify the way we're implementing this change or even modify the change mechanism itself, then we can be adaptable in that regard. Yeah, and finally, organizational development obviously addresses the culture and human side of the organization. So whereas before we weren't really addressing the cultural component, the human component of the organization, organizational development starts there pretty much first. Because we know that organizations are comprised of people. I mean, people are the firm. So, the organizational development approach starts there first, and again, takes that behavior science approach to reinforcing the behaviors that we want to see in the firm, and hopefully eliminating some of those that we don't. Just a couple of images here. The reading of the text this week will discuss Lewin's three-phase model for change. Very simple, but probably the most common and the most widely recognized soft systems change model. And again, it's kind of a umbrella, kind of an overarching model for implementing change, especially in terms of the soft systems models. And very simple. The three phases consist of what we call unfreezing, changing, and refreezing. And this isn't entirely complex, but basically we go through these three phases, and when we're dealing with situations of soft complexity, we see these phases pretty much magnified. Amplified because of the human element that is involved in these three phases. When we're trying to implement or institute a new change, we start with the first phase, which is unfreezing, which is pretty much most of the work. We address the human element. Your book refers to it as shaking up of people's habitual modes of thinking and behavior. And basically we're trying to kind of heighten or elevate their awareness of the need for change. So pretty much the unfreezing phase is pretty much the gaining buy-in phase. We spend all of our time addressing that cultural and political element of a firm that has an entrenched or established process. They haven't changed the way they do this for 20 years, so why change now? So we spend that unfreezing phase, and I call it unfreezing because think of it as kind of thawing everyone's position on this. If you go around the firm and you think of everyone as everyone in the firm, that there's this need to change, yet they're frozen, emotionally frozen. They are a block of ice, and their position is not going to change. They don't want to change. They don't want to do anything differently. They've done it this way for 20 years. And so what you, as a change agent, what you do is you spend your time um, campaigning, so to speak. And you slowly try to thaw or melt that block of ice. All the different individuals that you need to have buy-in from. You're in the unfreezing mode. You continually make the case for change. We need to do this. Here's why. We can do better. Here's why. Here's an example of why this isn't working. Here's why. You're constantly making that case for change, and then slowly that block of ice begins to melt. And then once it's unfrozen and their stance, their position on the change is a little more flexible, then we can actually get to the changing phase, or the moving phase as you might see it in your text. We can actually implement the change. We can actually move. We can actually change. Now that we're ready, we've got all the processes worked out, we've got the change mechanism ready, we go ahead and implement it. So obviously most of the work takes place here. We do the kind of the heavy lifting, so to speak, up front. Then we make the change, and then the final phase is refreezing. And this is important because we often neglect this refreezing. So again, go back to the block of ice. You have these different individuals in the organization. They're frozen, they're blocks of ice, they don't want to change. You spend your time thawing them out, and then you make the change, you reposition them the way you want them, and then you refreeze them. You put control mechanisms in place so that they're refrozen to prevent that backsliding. We don't want to backslide into the old behaviors. So we've got this newly acquired pattern of behavior. We're doing things in a new way. We don't want to backslide into the way we were doing things before. So that's kind of why we call it unfreezing, moving, or changing, and then refreezing. And again, this model, this 3 phases model, is probably one of the more common because it's something that we see, especially when we're dealing with soft systems models of change. It's probably the most common when you pretty much can summarize any change project and recognize these phases fairly quickly. So organizational development, kind of the grand scheme, the big picture here, you'll see organizational development and management of the entire organization as you'll see basically the entire organization here, the functioning of the organization is this kind of iterative process here, where the organizational learns. There's that knowledge management. The organization as a whole learns and develops new ideas, new ways of doing things. Obviously, hopefully we have some innovation. We change some things, develop new talent, which leads into the HR component: marketing, sales, customer service, PR, accounting, tax, finance, managing the operations of the firm, our resources, and production, shipping, logistics, and then the whole thing starts all over again. So we think of the development of the entire organization, and again, it's this constant loop, because if we're doing our job right as a firm, we're learning new things, developing new processes, new ways of improvement, new ideas. We're taking those ideas, we're changing the institution. We're developing those new ideas, products, and services, changing the organization as a whole to be able to handle those new ideas, products, and services. And then we take them to the market, and we obviously hopefully make money off of those new ideas, products, and services. And then we allocate resources appropriately to continue to change and then we start the whole process all over again. And so it doesn't ever, it's not this straight linear timeline where here's the starting point and then here's the ending point and we're finished. It's not like we get to here and we say, okay, we're done, we can stop improving. Instead, it is this constant, pretty much a feedback loop, constant loop that we build back into the way we learn within the organization, and then we get creative and we do new things. So if we're not building those new ideas and what we've learned into, again, something new and constant improvement, then we're just kind of wasting that information that we've learned. And so finally, as a change agent, if we're facilitating change, you're going to recognize these different phases that we go through when we're trying to change. So if we think back here, we've learned something, we're being creative, we're innovating, we're redesigning the organization to handle that change and the new ideas that we've learned, and then we're taking those things to market and we're making improvements. At some point or another, we've got to realize, this process here, this organizational learning and implementing these new ideas, we've got to figure out, okay, we can do something better. And so we create this sense of concern, and then we decide we need to go ahead and change, and then we make a major push for change, and then we take those new ideas and we change course. All that stuff takes place right in here. That's kind of this process here. And so as we go out there as change agents and try to facilitate change in our firm, you can kind of be looking for these different responses, these different phases, because they're going to be prevalent in any firm that you're trying to make a change. Any firm that you're trying to implement new ideas or improve or solve or dissolve problems. You're trying to make the firm more efficient, more effective. There's always going to be these kind of barriers, these stages of pushback and these different phases of moving the change through. But ultimately, the goal is to continue to build that into the operations of our organization. So that's pretty much it for Unit 8. I hope that you've enjoyed the course. That kind of wraps up the class. Again, I hope that you enjoyed the course, and as you work through the material this week, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to send me an email or give me a call, and we'll work through it.